Hey guys, Teflex. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about my favorite lens for my Sony camera and the lens I actually think you should invest in if you actually plan to shoot with a Sony camera or you already own a Sony camera. This video is mainly going to be targeted at people that are planning to upgrade from their kit lens and don't really know what lens to buy. Trust me, everyone has been in that situation before. By the way, the lens I'm going to be talking about is the Sony 24mm 1.4 G-Master lens. This lens does it all. Let's talk about the build quality of this lens. This lens is actually super lightweight and super compact, and for a full frame lens, that is actually very impressive. The body is made out of high-grade plastic, not iron or something, and that's one of the reasons why it's so lightweight. Now, on the body of the lens, you're gonna find the focus ring. This focus ring is actually very smooth. I mean, it's almost like the smoothest focus ring on any of my Sony lenses, but it actually takes time getting used to because this ring doesn't have a stop and it doesn't have like a marker to signify where the object has to be in order to be in focus. For example, like my Sony 90mm macro lens, it has like a stop on the ring and it also has marker to signify where the object has to be in order to be in focus, but you can't find that on the 24mm 1.4 G-Master lens, unfortunately. But apart from that, the focusing rings actually works super great, but it takes time to get used to, like I said. Now, my favorite thing about this lens is that the focusing distance is actually very close. Like you can get very close to your subject, like something like this. Focus, 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 focus. Okay. Yeah, it's around 0.79 feet, which is actually very good. When it comes to close focusing with this lens, I prefer to put the lens in manual mode because I feel like I get the best result out of this lens. And I'm not saying the autofocus of this lens is bad. In fact, the autofocus on this lens is actually great because I'm using autofocus right now. But I just noticed that when it comes to close focusing, I'm in total control with manual focus. On the body of the lens, you're also going to find an aperture ring. This lens opens very wide at 1.4 and very close at f16. There's also a switch that makes the aperture ring clickable or not. This switch is actually very useful because trust me, you don't want the aperture to suddenly change while shooting a video. That's going to be a total mess. So anytime you put the aperture ring in clickable mode, it's going to add some resistance to the aperture ring, and that is super great. Now, the lens also has a switch for manual focusing and autofocus. I actually find this switch very useful because I don't have to go into the camera settings to look for manual focus or autofocus. I could just do it right here on the lens. Now, the last button on the lens is the function button. It's basically like a custom button. You can assign any function to it. Basically, any function that requires you to like go deep into the menu system, that is what I'm going to put on the function button because it's going to save you a lot of time. Now, let's talk about the image quality of this lens. By the way, I already changed the camera from my A7 III to my A6400. I just want to show you how the lens actually looks like on a crop sensor. The one you were saying was the A7 III, which is a full frame camera. Now it's on a crop sensor. Now, before we talk about the image quality, I just want to make sure we get two things straight. Before you can get the best quality out of the G-Master lens or any lens in general, you have to make sure your lighting is right and your camera settings is right. If you have those two things in check, the Sony 24mm 1.4 G-Master lens produces one of the best and sharpest images on any Sony camera, period. Like, this lens is actually very good. I'm not really going to talk about the photography side of this lens because I mostly shoot videos like this and b-rolls and all that stuff. I don't really take much of pictures, so I don't really want to touch on it because I'm not an expert in that aspect. But when it comes to like talking head videos, this lens is actually very good. And also it's a 1.4 aperture lens, which means you can get a lot of blurry background, or as they like to call it, bokeh or bokeh, whatever they call it. But in my experience with this lens, to get the sharpest image, like the very best sharpest image on this camera, if that makes any sense, I always put the lens at 2.8. Right now the lens is at 1.4, but anytime I want to get the sharpest image out of this camera, and I'm not saying 1.4 is not sharp, but there's a difference between 1.4 and 2.8. I'm gonna put them side by side in this video. But anytime I want to get the sharpest image, I want the whole subject to be in focus edge to edge, I prefer to put the lens at 2.8 rather than 1.4. 1.4 actually has a different look from 2.8, obviously. When it comes to like b-roll with a lot of background separation, I prefer to use 1.4 because of the old smooth blurry background. But there are certain types of b-roll that I prefer to use 2.8, and this is when the subject doesn't have a lot of background separation. Let's say the object is on the table or something like that. If the object is actually close to the table, there's no need for a blurry background since the object is actually close to the background itself. Now let's talk about the price of this lens. This lens is actually very expensive, like really expensive, coming in around $13.50 or something like that. But recently I've been seeing it for like $12.50, $100 less or something like that on Amazon. It's still expensive, but this lens is actually worth every penny. As long as I shoot Sony, I'm still gonna have my Sony 24mm 1.4 G-Master lens because this lens is actually a very cool lens. Like, this lens is actually very cool, and if anyone is like planning to upgrade from their kit lens, this is the lens I'm going to recommend to anybody anytime. This lens is actually very great, and that's my review of the Sony 24mm 1.4 G Master lens. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace.